Good morning, Broncos fans, and welcome to Legends of Mile High, where we talk about history and current events. And today we have some current events to review, of course. And also, we are going to build the Broncos offense dream team by selecting the greatest players of the past from their respective positions. So jump into the live chat, give me your thoughts. There's going to be some controversy probably on a couple of the selections. And if you're a newer Broncos fan, some of these names may not be familiar to you, but they were some of the greatest in my mind that ever played for the Broncos at their respective positions. So let's definitely have a conversation about that. It's going to be a lot of fun. But before we get started, let's grab a few people from the chat. Say good morning. We got Dakota Whitehouse coming in already this morning saying, dream offense, huh? Interesting. Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and I hope you guys enjoy it too. There's going to be a few names that you may not recognize, and hopefully we can learn a little bit about the Broncos' history and some greats of the past that probably weren't even recognized as being great when they played, but they really were. And there's some stories that I'm going to tell, especially about one that will be very interesting and shed some light on why I think he was a great player. We got Dominique Martin coming in. Thank you for being here this morning. Says, hey, Tom and the rest of Broncos country. I was watching some Orange Crush highlights, and man, did those guys used to hit. Absolutely. I mean, they were a rough and tumble crowd back then, man. It was the defensive line was it, they were a rough crowd for sure. And the stories you look through some of the stories keeping some of those guys in line, man. They were wild child type of players. And you got Lyle Alzado on there. I mean, any defense that has him is gonna be a bit of a rough crowd for sure. But yeah, they were one of the best defensives of all time in 77, and they were hitters and they were very opportunistic as well. So yeah, thank you for coming in for saying that. And also don't forget Mile High Huddle for life. Thank you very much. And Dakota Whitehouse coming back in saying, anyways, good morning from Ohio. Well, welcome to the show from Ohio. We always love to see where you're from on our shows at Mile High Huddle podcasts, because I've said before, and we always say it, it's a state of being, and we're, Broncos fandom is a tribe. So wherever you are, you're part of the family. So thank you for being here, Dakota. Thank you for being here from Ohio. Thank you very much. And so let's jump into a little bit of the news. But before I say that, let's make sure that you follow the Mile High Huddle and subscribe. Get these alerts. I know it's early morning, but get the alert to wake up to some Broncos history. And you can follow me on Thomas Hall NFL if you'd like. Yeah, I just got back from the Tableau conference, so I missed last week. So I apologize for not being here, but it was a pretty interesting time, and got some better ideas for some of my basically my draft analytics Tableau dashboards, but also some more analytics for Broncos articles. So just be sure to check those out on Mile High Huddle. So thank you very much for everyone that's being here. We've got also grab a couple other, and then we'll jump into some news. We got David Youngkin coming in. Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Dream offense would have to be not the bottom tier in the league. Yeah, they would be one of the best offenses of all time if you could really put them all together this way, for sure. And then we've got Flo Ocho Cinco coming in. Good morning from over the pond. Well, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I know it's early over here, but not for you. So I'm glad you're able to join. Thank you. And we've got Kevin Peterson. I haven't seen you on here before, so I appreciate you being here this morning, saying the smiling assassin was the biggest hitter, in my opinion. Romo number 2. That's a good point. Yeah, the smiling assassin, Steve Atwater. Yeah, I mean, there's not a list of the best tackles or hits of all time in the NFL without his, some of his highlights being there. Romanowski, yeah, he was a big hitter too. That he was kind of a dirty player too, but man, he really brought a championship mentality to that defense when he came over from the 49ers. So I like it. There's so many big hitters. I mean, Dennis Smith is another one that you got to put up there at the top, man. Just listening to Thurman Thomas talk about getting hit by Dennis Smith and talking about half of his body went numb after that hit. It tells you just how hard of a hitter Dennis Smith was. But there were a lot of great hitters from the Broncos back in the day, and a lot of great safeties too. So got Jetty Splash saying John Lynch, and also saying good morning everyone, good vibes. So thank you, Jetty. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. So let's just jump into a little bit of the news first before we get into the Dream Offense. And Kareem Jackson was signed to the Broncos, which was a little bit of a surprise. I know they'd been talking about it, a surprise to me anyway, because I thought they were going to go with a little bit more of the youth movement. I think he's a great leader. It's still kind of a bit of a head scratcher to me. I think they must have a little bit of maybe a little doubt in Caden Stearns really taking that next step, possibly. I just makes it tough for some of these young guys to make the team if they're going to have Kareem Jackson on there, right? So you got PJ Locke, you got 2022 draft pick Delern Turner Yell, and then you also got JL Skinner, who's a draft choice. There's going to be a little bit harder for them to make an impact if you've got a veteran that is taking that roster spot. Now, I don't have anything against Kareem Jackson. I just think he has lost a little bit of a step. In the NFL, it seemed like he was not as good as he had been last year. So that's a little bit of a concern for me. I was hoping that Caden Stearns was the next great safety coming up to be alongside Justin Simmons. So I think it was a bit of a head scratcher for me, but we'll see how it turns out. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the starter or whatever, but yeah, I was just a little surprised by that signing. Now you need to have enough safeties on your squad to get through training camp and get through preseason and hopefully uninjured, but injuries tend to happen. So, maybe it's a little bit of that because they were a little bare in the cupboard, in safety for a while, even after the draft. And then the other news, which is interesting, is Jake Martin. They didn't slam the door on him really. They released him, and I would imagine for the cost cutting moves, but Coach Payton still kind of left the door open for him coming back. Now, I think that it may be important, right, for him to come back, only because there's so many questions surrounding that edge group. The injury history in that edge group, the inability of some of the players to take that big next step, some of the younger guys. So that having him come back would be, okay for me. I think they traded for him and he had a fairly sizable contract for his production. So letting him go was not a big surprise, but having him come back at a lower cost would actually be beneficial in my mind, especially getting through the rigors of training camp and preseason. I'm just going to grab my guy Miguel coming in saying good morning from New Mexico. Well, good morning. Well, hey, I'm in New Mexico as well, and thank you for the support for Facebook Stars. Really appreciate that. We should have a Broncos New Mexico get together during the season or something, and have everybody get together and watch a game or something at a sports bar, because there's a lot of fans in New Mexico who like the Broncos. It's amazing. I moved here 2 years ago, and I've met a lot of Broncos fans just out and about. So appreciate you coming in here this morning. And I think Kevin Peterson's agreeing with me about Kareem Jackson. He says, I agree. He misses lots of tackles. What if the Broncos signed him for his knowledge to train the new guys and cut him off the roster? Yeah, that's an okay point. I think he's a great leader. I've talked to players that talk about his leadership. Justin Simmons was talking about it, when we did an interview with him for the USAA event, and he talked a lot about Kareem Jackson being a leader for him. So that is a good point. It makes me, I don't know if they're going to just take him in for the knowledge and then cut him, but his leadership abilities have value for sure. And some of the other news that's out there, one of our guys, Keith Cummings, wrote about it. I believe it's on Mile High Huddle right now, which was Mark Schlereth talking about Quinn Miners. Now, Miners is one of my favorites, right? I love watching him play. He's so fun to watch because he's one of those that don't give up. And you see him when Javonte Williams was was struggling to gain those extra yards. Miners was usually there pushing the pile and slamming people around, but Schlereth put a little damper on Miners fans, so to speak, because it wasn't a bad critique. He came out and said that Miners needs to learn the nuances of the game, which is, most likely true. Schlereth's he's a legend in Broncos, great offensive lineman. So when he talks about things like that, you want to listen to him. But it's not a bad critique, right? I think he was a young player. Miners is a young player, and he needed to learn. He was from a smaller school, and he's got a little bit left to learn. But I think he's got a world of potential. So hopefully, with a better offensive line coach, he'll learn those nuances and become that, guard of the, a great guard of the future for the Broncos, hopefully. And then finally, there's the last piece that I want to just hit on the news. If you hadn't heard about it, is defensive backs Christian Parker has been selected for that coach accelerator program, which is a great sign. I think the Broncos coaches think very highly of him. He may be an up and comer. You may see, and I've seen on Twitter and other in the streams on some of these other shows talking about how he's the next defensive coordinator for the Broncos, which will be interesting. So that's good news. I mostly like the coaching staff that Peyton has assembled, and Christian Parker is one of them. And I think he's an up and comer. So it's going to be good. We've got Jeremy Sean coming in this morning saying, "Good morning, Thomas. The 98 Broncos offense was pretty close to perfect in my book. Don't want to forget to include the person calling the plays in the scenario. We learned how important that is last season." Yeah, the 98 Broncos. Thank you, Jeremy, for coming in and being here bright and early this morning. I'll tell you that the 98 Broncos is one of the best teams of all time. If you look at a list of all the greatest teams assembled and their winning ways, they rank the 98 Broncos pretty high. I mean, one of the best offenses of all time. I mean, they were number 2 that year because the Minnesota Vikings just went crazy that year with their offense. So, if you look at the yards and points, they weren't quite there, but they had the best running game, obviously, in the league that year. And Elway was, even though he was injured for 4 games, he still was on pace for one of his best statistical seasons. Had he played the entire season, you would have seen that. So yeah, great offense. And there's definitely some folks that are going to be filling out that dream offense from that team for sure. And most of the team will be filled out by players from that, because you get some Hall of Famers from there for sure. Michael Ronquillo, the legend, coming in with Facebook stars. Thank you so much for the support, as always, Michael. Really appreciate it. Saying, "Good morning, Thomas Hall and Legends of Mile High. Go Broncos and Buckham." So thank you for being here, Michael, this bright, early morning. Hope you have some coffee coming in from Arizona. It's even a little bit later or earlier over there. So I'm actually hoping, Michael, that I can get to the Arizona Cardinals preseason game to watch it. It's a bit of a drive, but hopefully you'll be there and get to meet you in person. So we'll see. I'm gonna try. I'm hoping to do it, but I think that'll be a fun preseason game to watch. All right, we got Poe Castillo coming in saying, "I love the no nonsense energy Peyton is bringing to Broncos country. Refreshing after the man-child Hackett." Yeah. Thank you for coming in from Facebook. Thanks for being here this morning. Yeah, it is refreshing for sure. I was excited about Hackett, and man, I was really disappointed at being so excited when we saw the games unfold, and he just was not ready for it. He was just not the leader that the Broncos needed. I don't know if he has it in him to, maybe he'll learn a little bit and then become a good head coach someday, but he just did not have that correct leadership style in order to get them over the hump for sure. He ended up being one of the worst coaches in Broncos history if you look at it. So yeah, thanks for coming in. Appreciate it. All right. We're going to kick this off by grabbing David Bishop saying, "I rewatched the first Super Bowl win against Green Bay recently. Man, what a game. TD for 150 and Atwater laying wood all over the field." Yeah, David, this is a good lead into let's build that offense that I talked about. That first Super Bowl was incredible, right? I mean, they beat the Packers, who were the heaviest favorites in the history at the time, Super Bowl favorites, and the Broncos went out and won. And TD having 150 yards and missing the entire second quarter, massive. and set the record for 3 rushing touchdowns. So that was another massive win. And I'll tell you, Atwater, had it not been for Terrell Davis, Atwater probably would have been the MVP of that game. And he could have been. I mean, really. I mean, you're not going to. It's hard to give it to a defensive player unless they, are one of those, Ray Lewis types or Lawrence Taylor types or something that has the big name or whatever. But Atwater's game was incredible. And I'll tell you, if it hadn't been for Atwater in that second quarter, the way he played, the Broncos probably would have been down a lot, because there were a couple plays that Atwater made that saved the Broncos in that second quarter. So his presence was hugely important. And maybe, next week, if there's not a lot of news, we'll jump into the defensive dream team. And obviously you got to have Atwater on there. All right. So let's get rid of some of the easy ones right off the gate. But before that, we'll grab Miguel coming with Facebook stars again. Appreciate the support. It's always welcome. Thank you so much for being here and supporting the show. His question: do you think Denver will be remembered for having good secondaries, or the Orange Crush be held in higher regard? Well, that's a good question. I think the no-fly zone is talked about considerably, right? I think it's, that's one of the best defenses of all time. If you look at 2015 defense, if you look at the offense and how poorly they played, you have to give more credit to the defense for what they did. Because you can look at the Bears defense, that 85 Bears defense, they had a great offense too. So I think it's hard to say. Both of them are going to be iconic. I think the Orange Crush not finishing the deal and winning the Super Bowl kind of hurts them in history. That was not their fault. I mean, the offense turned the ball over 8 times. It's hard to win when that happens. But yeah, both of them are held in high regard. And as far as secondaries go, I think the Broncos have one of the greatest histories of safety play in the NFL. Great safeties that have played for the Denver Broncos. I mean, you can go down the list and you get to number 10 and you're still going, wow, that was still a really good player, underrated player. So of all the safeties that have come and gone, and they've had some great cornerbacks too. I mean, Champ Bailey's one of the greatest cornerbacks of all time. Louis Wright never gets enough recognition. First shutdown corner, should be in the Hall of Fame. And it was back when people weren't really paying attention to the small town of Denver and the teams that were playing there. Right. So I think there's a long history of good secondaries, but the safety position, it's one of the longest histories of great players of any team. If you want to go down the list, you can find tons of them. All right, let's build our team. Let's get rid of the easy ones. Terrell Davis, obviously the greatest running back in Denver Broncos history and the greatest playoff running back of all time in all of the NFL, in my opinion. And I don't think you could, anybody that wants to argue, they don't really have much of an argument against that. He's the best running back that the Broncos have ever had. And that his ability in that zone blocking scheme was the perfect marriage. It's unfortunate that he got injured, but he's in the Hall of Fame because of his playoff prowess for sure. So you just can't take him off the board right away. He's the running back, right? Then you got Rod Smith. I mean, he's the greatest wide receiver in Broncos history. He's one of the wide receivers that you put on the team for sure. I would say in 2000, 2001, you could look at his stats and what he did that season. Even in a run-first offense, you could argue that he was the best wide receiver playing the game at that time. Even when you look at the Randy Moss, Terrell Owens, there were a lot of good players that playing in their prime at that time. Rod Smith was, you could argue, was one of the best. So he's definitely there. Your left tackle is an easy one for me. Gary Zimmerman. He's your left tackle. One of the greatest left tackles ever to play the game. 2-time all decade, when he played for the Vikings in the 80s and the 90s for the Broncos. You just can't leave him off the list. I know I like Ryan Clady, but he was on a Hall of Fame trajectory, but his injuries really knocked him down. So he's definitely at the top. And then Shannon Sharp, the tight end, that's an easy one as well. He kind of revolutionized the tight end game and brought in this more pass catcher, non-blocking tight end. He could block okay, but he was definitely he's the greatest tight end ever stood up for the Denver Broncos. So it's pretty easy to get those knocked right out of the way. Now, there's going to be a little bit of controversy. I think it's an easy one for me, but quarterback is John Elway, without a doubt. I know that there's a lot of the newer fans watched Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning's a great quarterback, and his stats are hard to deny. But John Elway was probably the most talented quarterback to ever really play the game. His talent was huge arm. His problem was early on, he just was not in the right offense. And as soon as he got the right offense, he had a better career in his elder half of his years than he did in his prime, right? In his younger years, because of that offense. So if you put him in the right offense for his entire career, the people would be talking about John Elway as probably the greatest quarterback that ever lived. So he's my guy for sure. Now I'm going to go with a little bit of a controversy here. And then we'll grab some comments in there and some of these others. But my second wide receiver, most people will probably go with Demaryius Thomas. And I like Demaryius Thomas. I think his skill and his ability and his athletic ability was amazing. I think he was helped a lot by having Peyton Manning and them throwing the ball like crazy, but he was talented. But I'm going with Lionel Taylor from way old school, from the early 60s when the Broncos were a terrible team, one of the worst teams for a long period of time. But Lionel Taylor was the first wide receiver flanker or whatever you want to call him back in the day to get 100 receptions in a game. And this was back when you had 14 game seasons, right? And teams weren't passing as much. I know the AFL passed a lot more, but this was still back in the day when running backs were king, and there was still rules against wide receivers. Like you could manhandle wide receivers all over the field back in the day. So it was a lot harder to get to that 100 receptions. And he had held so many of the top records for receptions back then that even until 1993 of them were still in the top 15 all time in 1990. So that was a few decades after he retired. He was still, in that record book. So that's my guy, going with Lionel Taylor. But let's see who we got. We got Kevin Peace coming in with Brandon Marshall as a wide receiver. I love Brandon Marshall as far as his play on the field. And you put together some of his years in the Broncos, it's incredible. Like had 3 consecutive years that were some of the best ever by a Bronco. But, he didn't last long. Josh McDaniels pissed him off and sent him packing. And I still think it's Rod and Lionel Taylor. But there's an argument for Demaryius Thomas for sure. Now, Miguel's coming back in with my guy, Tom Nalen, easily the best center ever to play for the Denver Broncos. He's a Hall of Famer. He's actually one of the greatest centers of all time. If you look what he accomplished on the field, not the awards that people they robbed him of that first team All-Pro in 1998. He had a better season than the winner and the All-Pro 2 for sure. 2,000 yards for one of the greatest 2,000-yard seasons, if you talk about touchdowns and lack of fumbles, of any of those in that club. Plus, he only gave up 1 sack that year. So he was robbed. Tom Nalen's definitely the center. So thank you for that. And we got Kevin Peters is coming back with the Dell brothers. Nice. Yeah, there's a bit of a history with all of the brothers that played for the Denver Broncos, starting with the Dannenhauer brothers back in the early days, the very, very early days. They were, in fact, I have a Mile High legend about Eldon coming to, and how he got to the NFL, just kind of by luck, coming along with his brother. So check that out. All right, Keith Brugman. Thank you for being here this morning, Keith, the man. Coming in with Eddie Mack, made those Super Bowls possible too. Yes, Eddie Mack's one of my favorite, should be a fan favorite at the very least. Great wide receiver who was tough as nails. I had another Mile High legend about him a couple of weeks ago, talking about his how he got into the NFL and the narrative for him and how it changed his play. So thank you very much. So right now we've got Rod Smith, Lionel Taylor as the 2 receivers. Elway's the quarterback. The left tackle's Gary Zimmerman. Center's Tom Nalen. running backs TD. And I'm going to go with fullback because I love fullbacks, and you can't leave any fullback off of the list that with the stature of Howard Griffith. He made that team so much better when he arrived. And I liked Aaron Craver, but in 1997, when Howard Griffith arrived, that running game took the next step, propelled them to 2 back-to-back Super Bowl championships. And that is, there's no way you can keep Howard Griffith off the field. And I know that the new offense is moving away from the fullback in the NFL, but we still got to have a fullback because, in my mind, if you're going to put a dream offense together, you're going to bring back the zone blocking scheme and that Shanahan scheme, and the fullback was super important. So you got to have Shanahan calling the plays and Kubiak calling the plays. So that's why I'm going with the fullback. Now, Shannon Sharp's tight end, obvious one. Okay, so now here we get into a little bit of old school that people probably don't know about. I'm going to go with the right guard. Now you could put someone at left guard, right guard that didn't necessarily play that position, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick with the people who actually played right tackle, played right guard, left guard, and that sort of thing. So I'm not going to put Ryan Clady over on the other side as a tackle. So right guard, Paul Howard. Now, you may not know who Paul Howard is, right? Because he's back from the day. Never got any recognition for awards or anything like that. He played from 1973 to 1986 with the Broncos at right guard. And the reason why I think he's the best right guard to ever play for the Broncos is evident by these stories that you hear from him about him. He used to leave training camp for like 3 days and come back and still have his position, right? And this was and he also used to go on like a bender on Thursday night, miss Friday practice, and still be the starter on Sunday because he was that valuable. He never got suspended. He never got demoted. He was so valuable to the team that the coaches just overlooked it. Now, you can't, if you're not a great player, they're not going to overlook it. They did with Paul Howard. So that tells me, regardless of the lack of Pro Bowl awards or recognition by these voters, that tells me that he was so important to the team that he could get away with that. He was tough as nails. And, the story is that in the playoffs in 77, Mean Joe Green punched him in the stomach. But if you go back and you look at the people that were actually there, it was a cheap shot right into the family jewels is what it really was. He only missed one play after that, came back in and continued to play. So Paul Howard is my right guard for sure. Left guard is someone we just talked about, Mark Schlereth. I mean, the guy is a borderline Hall of Famer in my book. He has an argument, being on 2 of the most iconic offensive lines of all time, the Hogs in Washington and obviously the Orange Hush in Broncos land. So I think that, you've got that offensive line almost filled out. You got right tackle. The Broncos have had a pretty, I don't know, it's a history of not having a great right tackle. But another person who doesn't get enough recognition is Ken Lanier. He's one of the most underrated Broncos players of all time in my book. Ken Lanier was a great right tackle. He didn't get a lot, he didn't get recognized for awards or anything like that. But if you line him up with any of the right tackles that came and gone, Ken Lanier lasted in the league for a very long time, played at a pretty high level, and one of the better offensive linemen on that team when he played from 81. Left for the Raiders in 93, which was terrible, but did come back to 94. So he was one of the longest tenured players in the Broncos back in the day, especially the offensive lineman. I know you could go with Tony Jones, right? Tony Jones played right tackle for a short time with the Broncos. He was slated in as a left tackle when Gary Zimmerman retired, but came back in 1990, in the 1997 season. So Zimmerman tried to play right tackle, and then after the bye, they switched him. So Tony Jones played right tackle for about 9 games. And so that's why I don't really have him as the right tackle. He had a masterful performance. We're talking about Atwater and Terrell Davis being, possible MVP. You could even put Tony Jones in that line for MVP for how he handled Hall of Famer Reggie White in that first Super Bowl victory. It was a masterful performance. You never heard. I think he had 1 tackle. That was it. Reggie White, and Hall of Famer, one of the greatest defensive linemen to ever play the game. and he handled him. So you could make an argument for Tony Jones, but that wasn't his real position. He was a left tackle. He just switched to get Zimmerman on the field on left tackle. So that's why I go with Ken Lanier there. And I think that's it. I think we got everybody. We got the whole team set up. We've got the offensive line: Zimmerman, Schlereth, Nalen, Paul Howard, and Ken Lanier. That'd be one of the greatest offensive lines to ever exist. Elway is the quarterback, Howard Griffith as the fullback, TD as the running back, Sharp as the tight end, and then you've got the two wide receivers, Rod Smith and Lionel Taylor. So we got Keith Brugman coming in asking me this question: did Matt Lepsis get any consideration for your team? He did, absolutely. Matt Lepsis is one of those underrated players as well. Came in as an undrafted rookie free agent, and I think he went over to the NFL Europe, if I remember correctly, to kind of build his skills and end up being a pretty solid tackle. And he did get some consideration, but for me, I think of Matt Lepsis. He's not as good as Gary Zimmerman by any means, and I think Ken Lanier just edged him out a little bit. I think Lepsis played both sides of the line, but he got some consideration, definitely. And so there's been some greats. If you guys want to throw some in there some others into the chat, we can talk about them. But I'm going to get Michael Ronquillo again. My favorite Terrell Davis stat is the 2008 rushing yards, and I just talked about that, Michael. If you look at his entire, I mean, they put the 2,000-yard club together, right? Any running back who goes over 2,000 yards gets on that club. And there's a few now. When Davis did it, he was the fourth one to ever do it in history. But look at his touchdowns and his lack of fumbles. He had two fumbles that season, and he had, I think, 25 touchdowns. If you compare that to all the other 2,000-yard club running backs, it doesn't compare. Now you can look at Eric Dickerson's season and be like, whoa, that was a lot of yards. Or O.J. Simpson, I mean, one of the greatest per game performances ever, for sure. But you look at how many. I think Dickerson fumbled like 14 times and only had not that many touchdowns as well. So I put that season as the greatest of any in the history of the game. So. Yeah. Anyway, we got Miguel coming in saying, "Are you putting Vaughn as edge or linebacker?" Well, we're not doing the defense this year, but I think that I actually think the NFL should change, kind of how they talk about their categories of players, and edge rusher should be that category, because Vaughn is one of the greatest edge rushers. When he retires, he's going to be considered one of the greatest edge rushers of all time. Now you can say he's a linebacker, whatever, but he's an edge rusher, and I think they need to recategorize that. So, and we've got Keith Brugman coming in saying, "I need to find some video footage of Lionel Taylor. Before my time, he sounds outstanding." There's a little bit of footage, and one of my early Mile High Legends talks about how he kind of came to the NFL, and I'm going to ruin the punchline if you haven't seen it, but he went to the Chicago Bears his first year in the league, and on a piece of paper that the coaches handed out asking what positions they play, he put any position or all positions. He could play all positions. They put him at linebacker. They put him at his real position of wide receiver or flanker, or whatever you want to call it. Probably, Chicago Bears. He's probably in the Hall of Fame with his resume. So, there's a little bit of footage out there. There's not much. You can find a little bit of it, but there's not a lot of film footage back in the day from the 60s Broncos times. There are some out there. The problem with Lionel Taylor was the team was terrible, right? They talk about how had the offensive line been better to give Tripucka a little bit more time, they would have had a better season. But the Broncos were awful. There was only about 3 really, really good players on those teams. Lionel Taylor being one of them, Goose Gonsolin, the safety, being another one his resume is incredible. You could probably put Frank Tripucka in there, first player to ever, first quarterback to get 3,000 yards in a season. And then Eldon Dannenhauer, right? So that's 4 that you could say, but the rest of the team was pretty bad, and that's why they were terrible for so long. So, Lionel Taylor doesn't get much recognition He wasn't a dynamic player. He wasn't one of those that, like the Haven Moses who could, field stretch or anything, but he was one of those possession type who could catch the ball, get open, and that was important back then, throwing the ball for the AFL team. So yeah, see if you can find it. If I can find some, I'll send it to you on Twitter. So thank you very much. All right. Jeremy's going to jump in with one more comment about TD. TD could add 2,400 yards. It's true. Yeah, he sat so many times in the fourth quarter because they were just whipping everybody. And it's one of the, if you consider, the playoffs, it's one of the greatest running back performances, if you include playoffs, of all time. I mean, he had so many yards in the playoffs, so many yards in the and I think it actually might be the most rushing yards if you include the playoffs of any running back, but I have to verify that. Can't say for sure. Gyla Maples coming in from New Mexico, saying good morning. Thank you. I'm in New Mexico, and we had Miguel's from New Mexico. Like I said, we got to have a get together for all the Broncos New Mexico fans. So, and coming in, thank you for the super sticker. I really appreciate that, guy. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a fellow New Mexican Broncos fan and being here this morning and listening to me talk about the greatest Broncos offense of all time. All right. Well, apparently people don't have a lot of disagreement with me on my offense. I thought there'd be a little bit more, especially with leaving Demaryius Thomas off and then some of the guards possibly. But it's pretty hard to argue with most of them. So I really appreciate. We got a lot of New Mexico Broncos fans. Gabe Rock's coming in, New Mexico Bronco fan here as well. All right, great. Appreciate you being here, Gabe, and thank you guys for sticking with me while we ran through the news. We ran through the greatest. If we could build the greatest offense, it would be amazing to see all these players on the field. But yeah, so thank you very much. I'm going to get out of here, and I want everybody to have a great day. Next week we'll have a Mile High Legend if we have time, and I'm not sure what it's going to be yet, but it'll be fun. And thank you very much. I will say goodbye, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much. Have a great day, Broncos fans.